Welcome to episode 7 of Claude's Unique Life. We find ourselves in the depths of World War II, and Claude and Ilse are expecting their second child. So here we go. Less than 2 months after arriving in Indianapolis, we visited the hospital and the Lord gave us our second cute little girl, Claudia. Your Aunt Irene came and helped out at home until your mother was able to care for us again. We had many visitors from Chicago on weekends, my folks, Ilse's folks, aunts and uncles. Our car had a space behind the seat which was large enough to hold Claudia's crib and a child's chair for Judy. So we went to Chicago for Christmas this way. We were worried about it being too cold for Claudia, so I placed a recording portable thermometer from work on the back shelf, and we had no problems. The girl was a traveler. We bicycled with her mother before she was born, traveled to and from and around Philadelphia, walked the Wissahickon Valley Forge in Philadelphia. We traveled to Indianapolis, and of course then she was born there. Now she is traveling with a moving family. She was a happy, exciting little girl. Thankfully, she didn't have the allergy problems that Judy had. As she learned to talk, she called Indianapolis Indian nice apples. And she was a dreamer. When playing alone, she had a make-believe friend called Keeney. I think it was Keeney Jones. We didn't have snow there, but we did have a lot of freezing rain. So we pushed her in the same sled that we'd used for Judy. We would go ice skating on the frozen river and push her on the sled. Judy, of course, was ice skating by this time. Claudia was always on her toes, like her mother. She was skipping and jumping along the sidewalk in downtown Indianapolis one time with her pigtails flying, and a lady passing by said she ought to be a toe dancer. Now, I don't know what a toe dancer is, but there you have it. She and Judy and friends often skated around in our basement. There weren't any sidewalks that were paved at that time. They used a little phonograph that I had made because such things were not available at a price we could afford at that time. I made it up for them for Christmas. When I had built it up enough to try it out before putting it in a case, your mother and I sat on the floor in the living room after the girls were in bed. We held the mechanism in my lap and played records. We were elated that it worked. It had many years of hard use. Unfortunately, 3 girls is sometimes a crowd, so the older ones, Judy and her friends, too often excluded Claudia, who was always a very sociable individual. This made her quite unhappy at times. Judy's reading book at school really upset me. I wanted to go to the school and straighten them out, but your mother calmed me down. They had a story about tree people. How early evolution is taught in our public schools. We attended Sunday school, church, and prayer meetings at the Baptist church on the east side, and we joined there. The minister who was there when we left was Peter Vroom. He was saved and nurtured in the faith through Barnhouse of Philadelphia. He was an army chaplain and was with our troops during the Battle of the Bulge and some famous Rhine Bridge battles. We still, in 1987, keep in touch with the wife of our Sunday school teacher, a former pastor at that church, Ruth King. Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, we had a neighbor babysit while we went to church and took a ride into town where we went window shopping, which is very inexpensive. There were very few people out, and would you believe we weren't afraid to walk those streets at night? What has happened to our country? My work was very interesting. Troubleshooting instrument systems were what I was doing at the time. Some jobs were stinking, dirty, and hot. Foundries, heat treating chemicals, electronics, bakeries, meat packing and smoking, oil refineries, auto plants, airplane plants, home appliance plants like refrigerators and stoves, aircraft gasoline motors, jetties, glass plants, paper mills, university labs, battery plants, rock wool, asbestos, electric generating plants, brick plants, ceramic plants, probably a few others I can't think of right now. But it's just a list of our various businesses that I serviced. I also went to shell and ammunition, coal mines, cement mills, flour mills, and grain elevators. We had 2 service engineers in the whole region. We were on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but we didn't have too many night and weekend calls. We'd travel many miles. In fact, when I turned in my car in 1946, it had around 96,000 miles on it. It was always a good feeling to be able to put a troubled system back in good working order. The dirtiest was checking temperature and humidities in kilns where they dried bricks. It was 75 to 100 feet long, and I was wading through soot which was ankle deep. I would take prospective new hires with me, and we would come out looking like two black crows. The itchiest was the rock wool plant. The air was filled with rock wool like a fog, and you would itch for a day after working there. The hottest was the glass plants. We had to walk on planks on top of the molten glass furnace to check thermocouples. It was hot and frightening to look through cracks in the brickwork and the molten glass. As I remember it, it was around 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. Your mother always knew when I had been in a meatpacking plant because she said I smelled like smoked ham. I can't take up too much space to cover too many of the war plants, but they were humming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And as a little sidebar, one thing that I had learned was that he apparently was really good at adjusting and fine-tuning the Norden bomb sights, which at the time were top secret. So it's not surprising he never mentioned that in these memoirs, but he apparently regularly did work on those bomb sites, as well as a bunch of other military work, that some of which is mentioned later. On a trip to Republic Aviation, north of Evansville, Indiana, I had a car problem. And by the way, Republic Aviation built the P-47 Thunderbolts, which had a lot to do with us winning the war in Europe. Anyway, I had a car problem. About halfway there, I ran into freezing wet snow. The highway had no sharp turns, just long, easy curves. Near the plant, I had to make a 90-degree turn left, but snow and ice had built up around the front wheels, so I could only turn them a little bit. Fortunately, it was early in the morning, so there wasn't traffic. I had to back up and take a couple passes to make the turn. I had to do the same thing when I went into the parking lot. But by the time I had serviced their instruments, the sun had melted the ice around the tires, and all was good. We had a lot of freezing rain. I would drive with the left wheels on the tar strip down the center of the highway when the sun melted it until meeting another car, and then I pulled slowly to the right, putting the right wheels on the ground on the right side of the road. One morning, doing my legal 35 miles per hour on dry pavement, I topped a hill and saw the downhill side was a solid sheet of ice with a car trying to come up. I held the accelerator steady, prayed, and tried to ease off the pavement to the right. The car started heading to the left, but sliding to the right. Just before reaching the other car, the rear wheel hit the gravel at the side of the road, and it straightened out safely, and I sang, "Thank you, Lord, for saving my soul." The rest of the trip, I slowed down at the top of each hill to see how the other side was. We had gas rationing. Now, I had C stamps for work, but since I didn't own a car, I had no A stamps for private driving. One Christmas, to allow us to visit our folks in Chicago, the Chicago sales manager of Honeywell sent me a letter to come to Chicago on business. I made service calls along the way. Ilse and the two girls waited in the car for me, and we made the trip without any problems. Now, you couldn't always find a gas station, and on 2 occasions, I coasted into stations on an empty tank. One of them, I didn't reach the pump, and the attendant helped me push the car to the pump. Food was also rationed. Meat and sugar was almost impossible to get, except lamb. Your mother cooked a delicious leg of lamb with peas in gravy. The other service engineer, Bill Hagan, who was single, liked peas in the gravy and ate with us occasionally. Ruth McMurray visited us on one vacation, and she doesn't like lamb. We had a leg of lamb for dinner, but we didn't tell her what it was. She took extra helpings, and she really liked it. She couldn't believe it when we told her later what it was, because she said she didn't like lamb. Oh well. When I had to be away overnight, I would leave at 3 or 5 in the morning to be on the job by 8 a.m., and I'd often work late into the night. On one trip to Evansville, Indiana, I serviced the instruments at a ceramics factory late in the evening. They control their furnaces at very high temperatures to fuse the ceramics properly. When I reached the hotel about midnight, a call was waiting for me to rush back to the kiln over in Kentucky. I called the manager and listened to how he said the instrument was acting, and I told him I thought the battery was bad. He insisted he had changed it. I drove on over, and yes, the battery was bad. I replaced it with a good one and gave him a bill and headed back to Evansville for a couple hours of sleep. Early in the morning, the manager and the owner of that ceramic factory called me out of bed. His factory had burned down in the night. Would I please come over and give him an estimate for what it would cost to repair the Honeywell instruments? This was a total loss. Would you believe the fire had started back in the rear of the factory where the cardboard cartons are stored? The firemen came and squirting water which hit those hot furnaces, and they exploded, raising the entire factory. This owner was always so appreciative of my work for him that he would insist on buying me dinner. I had been servicing his equipment about every 3 months. His design engineer was an alcoholic. He probably caused the fire because he often slept off his drunks lying on those cartons. We did a lot of work for the Allison division of General Motors in Speedway, Indiana. They built gasoline, conventional engines, liquid-cooled ones, which were used in a lot of our fighter planes. Our instruments were in their test cells and also their engineering departments. They were V12 engines. They also put 2 of them on one crankcase, making it a V24. They had 2 propeller shafts, one inside the other, and they used 2 sets of propellers, one rotating one direction and the other in the opposite direction. Near the end of the war, they converted to building jet engines. My boss designed, and I built an instrument to measure the thrust. Honeywell then built similar ones for all the jet engine test cells. Allison wanted to measure the temperature in the tailpipes of the jets. The problem they gave us was to measure the temperature of a force of gases equal to a brick wall moving past our thermocouple. Yeah, I don't know what that means either. We gave them a 20-gauge thermocouple in a 1/4 inch stainless steel protecting tube. Didn't work. It was too slow. Finally, they just used a bare 20-gauge thermocouple. We tried using radiomantic. This was a device which sighted on the outside of the burners to detect the temperature. The engine they were placed on blew up and ruined all of them. I wasn't there for that test. After the war, Allison designed a transmission for Army tanks. We rebuilt the jet engine thrust instrument to measure forces applied as a tank shifted into reverse while going full speed forward. Now that was quite a shock. Would you believe all the years that we lived in Indianapolis and I never saw a race on the Indianapolis Speedway? Your Uncle Herb visited us several times as the Army shipped him back and forth across the country. Finally, he served in mail service in Manila in the Pacific. And this is his ring, which has been passed down to me. Now, as a sidebar, it was a really popular thing for soldiers that were jewelers to take old shell casings and things like that and turn them into jewelry. And I don't know what this is made of, but I suspect it's probably an old spent casing, so it's probably brass. My father-in-law, who was in the Navy in Hawaii for World War II, had a Navy ring that had been made by a soldier that was also a jeweler. So kind of a cool little factoid about things that happened in World War II. Anyway, back to the story. Your Uncle Ken, even though he volunteered the day after Pearl Harbor, never saw any fighting. Each time he completed a training course for the Air Force, they would make him an instructor. He would keep after them to let him get into the action. Finally, he was instructing pilots on our biggest bombers and managed to get them to let him go to Okinawa. The day after his flight landed, the Japanese surrendered. Your Aunt Irene always said if they would let Ken fight, he would end the war sooner. How about that? VJ Day, ending the war, finally arrived. Plants which had been producing war materials converted back to their original civilian products. We had not been aware of the production of the A-bomb, but we had lost instruments which had been ordered for our customers to a high-priority job, which turned out to be the Manhattan Project. They took anything they needed, anytime they needed it. This is when we realized the Manhattan Project was actually designing the A-bomb. Because of my car record being the best in our region, I received the very first new car available after the war in 1946. This was much to the disappointment of one of the salesmen who had to take my old car. Your uncles Herb, Art, Joe, and Ken all returned safely. Herb went back to the post office. Art went back to R.R. Donnelly as a pressman. Ken to Tucson, Arizona with Martin Marietta. Joe back to the State Line generating plant as an operator. But then a surprise. We thought our family was complete, but the Lord had other ideas. On September 5th, 1947, David was born, a redhead complete with curls. Your grandmother Binky came to help until your mother could care for us again. Judy, Claudia, as well as the rest of the family and relatives were elated. I wanted to bring your mother and David home in our car, but the doctor insisted on an ambulance taking them home. I wanted the ambulance to follow me, but he said he knew how to get to our house. Well, Ma and I reached home and waited and waited. Finally, the ambulance arrived. He had gotten lost, and in the process, your mother had a rough time on the trip. Your mother really suffered with all of your deliveries. I prayed this would be the last one. My reputation and experience with so many different processes impressed the sales manager in Philadelphia. He invited me to take a job as an instructor at the Brown Instruments Training School. Ilse and I discussed it and prayed about it and decided to take the job. I visited Philadelphia to talk to the managers to find a house. Rent was almost twice what we were paying. Finally, I rented a semi-detached house on Sherman Street, which had a big front yard. By that I mean about 3 feet by 15 feet, and a backyard which ended at the railroad. Fortunately, it was below the level of our yard, and most of the trains were electric, so the switch engine was the only one that was noisy. The backyard must have been about 15 feet by 20 feet, and that was big for Philadelphia. I had bought the 46 Plymouth and drove it to Philadelphia for this house hunting. I returned to Indianapolis on the train. Interestingly, I met my old state line boss on the train platform in Philadelphia. I do not remember any problems on the trip. Your Aunt Eunice was in the Nyack Missionary Training University. She came to Germantown for the Easter weekend to help us get straightened out. We decided not to go to church on Easter. We would let the ones that only go twice a year fill the church, and we would clean. We weren't there long when I felt we had made a mistake. Financially, we were very short. David was very fussy. The water didn't agree with him. And we would not have made it if your Uncle Art had not helped us out financially for several months. And a raise I had been promised did not come through. We still had good times. We were very near the Wissachoquin Park, and we walked there often. We attended the Schleton Avenue Baptist Church, and your mother became quite thin from running up and down a lot of stairs. My first lecture at the school was how to calculate the orifice size in an orifice plate in gas or liquid flow lines. I had never calculated one since leaving school in 1942, and it went okay. I lectured from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a couple 15-minute stops and an hour for lunch, and I generally walked home for lunch. I couldn't afford to eat out. Later, I lectured on thermocouples, thermometer pressure gauges, flow meters, pneumatic control, percent relative humidity, electronics, electric control, pH measurements, and other control systems. It was very interesting and tiring when lecturing. The teaching was done on a platform about 1 foot high, and stepping up and down off of it for 8 hours was really tiresome. But generally, there was a week or so between the 3-month classes to straighten up things and get it ready for the next class. Prior to Christmas, we had even more time, generally from Thanksgiving through the 1st of January. Some of the time we used to trim a Christmas tree and build a special display. They would be animated, such as ice skaters and skating in a circle on an ice pond. One Christmas, our first one there, I built a round Christmas tree stand with a circle of HO track on it. The whole stand, tree and all, rotated 340 degrees and then reversed. The tree lights flashed off and on, and some of them bubbled. Your dear mother finally said, "Let's either have the tree stand still or the lights stop flashing. This is just too much action." Would you believe that circle of track with some modifications with us in Ballston Lake, New York, 2 houses in Philadelphia, 1952 to 1955, went to Oklahoma City, Midwest Oklahoma, Pottstown, Graterford, Pennsylvania, and Marriott Island, Florida. From the first house on Sherman Avenue, Judy had quite a walk to school. It must have been close to a mile each way. Claudia started school there and also had the long walk. One day, when Claudia came home, she stopped at the wrong house. The woman who came to the door scared her terribly, and that woman thought that Claudia was just ringing the door for mischief. When Claudia reached our house, 1 or 2 away, she was hysterical. Poor Claudia really had it rough here. At school, she caught lice in her hair. We had to shave her beautiful, long, blonde locks and medicate her scalp. She wore a bandana on her head, and she really suffered through this until her hair grew out again. Then she had a problem with her leg. The nurses in the hospital gave her a very hard time, and we suffered with her. Judy had an ingrown toenail cut at the hospital. I almost passed out watching. I had to leave the room. In our backyard, I built a frame for swings for Claudia and David, as well as a sandbox. They spent many happy hours there with an occasional train going by just out of sight. So this concludes episode 7. In episode 8, the last episode, I share a few highlights about my grandfather's very storied career and some notes that my grandmother wrote down about her early life as well. I share my thoughts on kind of what I've learned about my grandfather. We never lived very close to them. They would visit us once in a while, but I knew him as my grandfather, an older-ish man, and certainly not this young, vibrant person that I have learned about as I went through this story. So I'll share some thoughts on that. And anyway, I hope you tune in for that, and thanks for watching.